cracked sidewalks and time-worn porches. Autumn had begun to touch the leaves with amber and crimson, and the scent of wood smoke hung faintly in the air. It was a kind of town where everyone knew everyone else, where the local grocery clerk had memorized your order before you walked through the door, and where gossip traveled faster than self-service. People waved at passing cars, not always because they knew who was inside, but because it was just what folks did. That morning, an unusual buzz filled the streets. Word had spread the day before that Donald Trump would be passing through, making a quick appearance before heading to a nearby fundraising gala. It wasn't exactly a campaign rally, more of a pit stop for optics, but in a town this small, even a glimpse of a former president stirred up excitement, tension, and strong opinions. Lawn chairs appeared along Main Street before sunrise, American flags were propped in planters, and locals stood sipping coffee from thermoses, speculating about the route his motorcade would take. At Millie's Diner, the heart of local conversation, everyone had something to say. Some praised Trump as a straight shooter, a man who had shaken up a corrupt system and spoken to the forgotten middle class. Others rolled their eyes, accusing him of sowing division, fanning fear, and building a brand more than country. It was there at a small window booth that Clara Whitmore sipped her tea quietly, listening more than speaking. Her hands, knotted with age and time, wrapped around the warm ceramic mug. Her eyes, clouded just slightly with a mist of cataracts, were still sharp enough to see through performance of politics. Clara was 82 years old, a retired schoolteacher who had taught American history for nearly 4 decades. She had lived through wars, recessions, civil rights movements, and assassinations. She had seen America evolve in ways both painful and promising. She remembered Eisenhower's calm dignity, Kennedy's soaring rhetoric, Nixon's downfall, and Reagan's charm. But in recent years, she had grown weary, not because of age, but because of what she saw as the unraveling of values she once believed were unshakable: decency, accountability, compassion. She hadn't planned to say anything. When her granddaughter offered to walk with her to the viewing spot, Claire agreed only because she was curious. "I want to see what people are so worked up about," she said. She didn't wear protest signs. She didn't hold a flag. She simply stood by the corner of Main and Cedar, leaning on her cane, wrapped in a wool coat she had owned for 20 winters. Then came the flashing lights, the hum of engines growing louder, the cheers erupting from the small crowd. The motorcade rolled in, sleek and intimidating. Secret Service agents scanned the sidewalk from behind tinted windows. A black SUV pulled slightly ahead, and the back window of a limousine rolled down. For a few seconds, the unmistakable hair and profile of Donald Trump could be seen. He gave a slight wave, a smile to the cameras, a nod to the flag-waving crowd. It was then that Clara stepped forward. Not rashly, not angrily, but purposefully. Her cane tapped against the pavement with each step, the sound oddly clear despite the surrounding noise. The people closest to her quieted, unsure what this frail-looking woman was about to do. She stopped just feet from the road and called out, not loudly, but with unmistakable clarity. "Mr. Trump," she said. The wave stopped. The hand dropped. Trump turned his head slightly, perhaps expecting praise or question. What came next silenced everyone. "You're selfish." There was no insult, no profanity, no drama, just 2 words, spoken with the authority of someone who had nothing to gain and nothing to prove. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. People froze, some gasping, others staring. Even the Secret Service agents seemed unsure whether to move forward or let the moment play out. Trump didn't respond. His face, normally animated, was momentarily blank. He turned his gaze away. The window rolled up slowly, and a limousine pulled forward. Claire didn't smile. She didn't look around for validation. She turned back to the sidewalk, adjusted the collar of her coat, and tapped her way back toward her granddaughter. For those who witnessed it, the silence afterward was more deafening than any shouting match could have been. Later that day, phones buzzed with footage. Someone had recorded the moment and uploaded it to social media. "Old Lady Calls Trump Selfish" was a headline of the hour. Within minutes, it began to spread, first across local news, then national platforms. The internet had no shortage of opinions. But one thing everyone agreed on, there was something raw, real, and almost poetic about the moment. Clara didn't log on to Twitter. She didn't scroll through Facebook. Her granddaughter told her the video had been seen by millions. Clara nodded, then went back to her knitting. "Let them talk," she said. "I've already said what I needed to say." In a town where not much ever changed, one morning had become legend. Not because a celebrity visited, but because an old woman, with nothing but her voice and her truth, reminded everyone that sometimes the smallest voice can carry the greatest weight. Clara wasn't just anyone. She had lived through 12 presidents, from Franklin D. Roosevelt to Joe Biden. Her life was a living museum of American history, and her memory held more wisdom than most history books could ever convey. She remembered the day Pearl Harbor was bombed. She was just a child, sitting on the floor of her parents' living room, listening to the radio with wide eyes as her father stood frozen in disbelief. She watched her older brothers go off to war, each one with a brave face and trembling hands. She remembered the ration stamps, the blackouts, the victory gardens. She lived through fear, unity, sacrifice, and she never forgot it. In the 1960s, Clara marched arm in arm with activists in her local community, standing up for civil rights not because it was fashionable, but because it was right. Her husband, Thomas, a soft-spoken librarian, supported her quietly but firmly, knowing she couldn't ignore injustice when she saw it. Together, they raised 3 children to be kind, thoughtful, and civic-minded. 2 of those children, both boys, would later join the military, inspired by their parents' values of duty and service. And heartbreakingly, both would never return. Clara buried them with the dignity of a soldier's mother. Quiet strength, folded flags, and a pain she never once used for political currency. Those words resonated because they weren't rehearsed. They came from the deep well of lived experience. Clara had nothing to gain, no social media presence, no nonprofit, no book deal waiting. She spoke simply because she could no longer stay silent. And in doing so, she spoke for millions of Americans who felt disillusioned, disoriented, and desperate for a return to dignity in public discourse. Many who saw the video of Clara confronting Trump were struck not by anger in her voice, but by sorrow. The kind of sorrow that only comes from watching something you love slowly lose its way. She didn't shout, didn't wave her fist, didn't insult. She looked directly at a man who had built a career on bravado and branding, and she told him what few had ever dared to say to his face. Not on cable news, not behind a podium, but as a citizen to a leader. "You're selfish." In those 2 words, Clara distilled what she believed to be the heart of the problem. Not just with Trump, but with a broader cultural shift that celebrated self-interest over service. It wasn't just about him. It was about what we as a nation were beginning to tolerate, normalize, even reward. As her granddaughter helped her inside after the crowd dispersed, Clara didn't gloat. She wasn't even sure if her words had been heard. But in the stillness of her home, surrounded by photos of her children and students, she felt a small sense of peace. She had used her voice. She had told the truth as she saw it. And in a world full of noise, sometimes a quiet truth is the most powerful sound of all. Within hours, the video of Clara's confrontation went viral. Some praised her courage. Others criticized her bluntness. But everyone agreed her words left an impact. On Twitter, hashtags like #OldLadyTruth and #ClaraSpeaks began trending. Conservative commentators dismissed it as a publicity stunt, while progressive voices hailed Clara as a modern-day folk hero. YouTube channels used slow-motion replays of the moment with dramatic music. TikTok creators lip-synced her line, "You're selfish," placing over footage of other controversial leaders. What made the moment powerful wasn't just the accusation. It was the calmness, the quiet confidence behind it. Clara wasn't seeking fame. She wasn't filming for likes. She was simply telling the truth as she saw it, in the only way she knew how, plainly and bravely. Back in her small, cluttered kitchen, Clara had no idea what was happening online. She was spreading strawberry jam on toast and listening to the morning weather on the radio. It wasn't until mid-morning that her neighbor's granddaughter, Ava, came bursting through the door holding a phone. "You're famous, Miss Clara," she exclaimed, thrusting the screen into her hands. Clara squinted at the tiny screen. watching herself in shaky footage, her voice steady even as security moved closer to her in the background. "You're selfish," she repeated in the clip, eyes locked on the politicians. She shook her head and handed the phone back. "I just said what needed saying." But the world had already decided Clara was more than that. News vans arrived by the afternoon. A producer from a morning show left 3 voicemails and a fruit basket. Some strangers sent flowers. Others sent hate mail. One letter, scrawled in angry block letters, accused her of being a brainwashed pawn. Clara read them all and tucked them in a drawer beside old birthday cards and dog-eared recipes. She hadn't expected any of this. Her confrontation had come not from strategy, but from frustration, a frustration that had been simmering for years. She'd watched her community suffer. She saw the local factory close, her friends' pensions shrink, the cost of living go up, while promises from leaders grew emptier. Her son had lost his job 3 times in the past decade. Her niece had been denied insurance coverage for her daughter's medication. For Clara, politics wasn't abstract. It was personal. That day, when she saw the senator walk to the town square with his camera-ready smile and a line of carefully screened supporters, something inside her snapped. "You've had your say for years," she told him. "Now you'll hear mine." She hadn't shouted. She hadn't cursed. She had simply spoken from her gut. But that, apparently, was revolutionary. By evening, think pieces began to circulate. One blog post titled "The Wisdom of Clara" broke down her words line by line, calling it an unexpected masterclass in civic engagement. A political satire show recreated the confrontation using puppets. A coffee shop in Brooklyn temporarily renamed their bold roast Clara's Courage. Clara was amused by some of it, bewildered by most. When a stranger offered to start a GoFundMe on her behalf, she politely declined. "I don't need money," she said. "I need people to pay attention." By the end of the week, Clara's name was being brought up in town hall meetings across the country. Young activists used her clip to inspire their own actions. Her calm words, delivered without theatrics or pretense, cut through the noise in a way professional pundits couldn't. Still, Clara stayed out of the spotlight. She gave one short interview to a local paper where she said, "I didn't do anything special. I just didn't let myself be quiet this time." After that, she stopped answering media calls. But the effects lingered. In the weeks that followed, the senator's approval rating dipped. His carefully scheduled appearances were interrupted by chants of "You're selfish." Protesters carried signs with Clara's face on them, stylized like campaign posters. One artist drew her in the style of Norman Rockwell, standing tall, speaking her truth. Clara didn't understand all of it, but she understood people were hungry for honesty, real honesty, not polished slogans. She knew that most folks didn't want to be famous. They wanted to be heard. She just happened to be the one to say out loud what so many were thinking. She continued her daily life, feeding the birds outside her kitchen window, tending to her garden, and visiting the library on Thursdays. Some people approached her on the street to thank her. Others avoided her altogether, unsettled by her sudden notoriety. She didn't mind. Clara had never cared much for opinions. She kept a small journal now, not because she thought anyone would read it, but to capture what it felt like to speak up, how her voice shook slightly before it didn't, how silence fell across the crowd after she spoke, how the senator's eyes had darted away. "Truth doesn't always roar," she wrote one evening. "Sometimes it just stands there, steady as an old tree, too stubborn to sway." The world would move on, of course. Another viral moment would come. Another face would flash across the internet. But for a brief moment, Clara, quiet, elderly Clara, reminded everyone what real courage looks like. Not flashy, not loud, but unwavering. And in homes across the country, people remembered her words and found, maybe, the strength to speak their own. Clara's statement sparked more than internet buzz. It ignited a deeper national conversation. What does it mean for a leader to be selfish? Is advocating for one's own success and branding always inherently wrong? Or is there a line between self-confidence and self-absorption? Pundits on both sides debated whether Trump's leadership was rooted in personal ambition more than public service. Psychologists were interviewed about the traits of narcissism in leadership. Veterans and teachers, many of whom identified with Clara, began speaking out. For some, Trump's America First policies were necessary and pragmatic. For others, they symbolized a dangerous shift toward isolation and arrogance. Clara's words didn't just challenge Trump. They challenged Americans to re-examine their values and redefine what kind of leadership they truly wanted. Cable news ran Clara's line, "You're selfish," on a loop, dissecting it from every angle. One panelist called it an emotional outburst born of economic anxiety. Another argued it was a rare act of democratic courage. Late-night hosts turned the moment into comedy, but even their punchlines ended with something sincere. People were listening. Soon, university classrooms used the clip in lectures about civic engagement. In one political science course at Midwestern College, a professor played the footage and then asked, "Was Clara wrong?" The room was silent. Eventually, a student raised her hand and said, "Maybe she was rude, but maybe we need a little rudeness to wake us up." Across the country, people from all walks of life began to share their own experiences, moments when they felt voiceless in front of powerful systems. A nurse from Detroit posted a video describing hospital shortages, saying, "I wish I had the guts Clara had." A factory worker in Pennsylvania wrote an op-ed titled, "She spoke for me too." Clara's calm rebuke had tapped into something raw and universal, the fatigue of being unseen, unheard, and overruled. Clara never intended to start a movement, but her words, simple and sharp as a nail, had punctured the surface of national complacency. She didn't offer policy solutions or political manifestos. She reminded a nation that morality still mattered, that leadership should be accountable not to ego, but to empathy. In time, the world would move on. The next election cycle would bring new headlines, new distractions, new viral moments. But Clara's words would endure, not because they were loud, but because they were honest. In a moment dominated by noise, she offered something rare, clarity, and perhaps that was the most powerful kind of leadership of all. Weeks passed, and Clara returned to her quiet life. She wasn't looking to change the world. She just wanted to be heard. But in being heard, she inspired thousands. Students painted murals of her likeness. Schools invited her to speak virtually about civics and compassion. Even some who disagreed with her admitted that her courage was admirable. Clara reminded people that sometimes the most powerful voices aren't the loudest or the richest. They're the ones who live long enough to know better, who have seen history repeat and refuse to stay silent. She didn't have social media accounts. She didn't issue statements or clarify her position, and yet her words lingered in public discourse like the final note of a song that refused to fade. Across dinner tables and city councils, radio stations and podcasts, her voice, gentle, firm, and unwavering, was repeated again and again. "You're selfish." It was more than a criticism. It was a question wrapped in an accusation, a question the nation couldn't stop asking itself. Political candidates began getting asked in interviews, "What do you think about what Clara said?" Some answered defensively, others introspectively. A few admitted they were rethinking how they led, not out of fear of being called selfish, but out of a renewed desire to be seen as selfless. In town halls across the country, ordinary citizens, nurses, janitors, single parents, veterans, quoted Clara before launching into their own frustrations. It became a quiet anthem, a rallying cry not for protest, but for reflection. In Washington, aides were instructed to avoid mentioning Clara's name. Behind closed doors, however, her words had sparked unease. Staffers combed through town hall footage, wondering if more Claras would emerge. Speechwriters tweaked the president's messaging, softening lines that sounded too self-congratulatory. Aides advised avoiding terms like, "I alone can fix it," in future addresses. Trump, for his part, didn't directly respond to Clara, but in his next rally, his tone was sharper, his defenses more pointed. "They say I only care about myself," he told the crowd. "But let me tell you something. If I didn't care, who would?" The applause was thunderous. Yet for the first time in a long time, his base wasn't the only audience. Outside the arena, a group of seniors stood quietly, holding signs that read, Listen to Clara. The conversation expanded far beyond partisan lines. Clergy gave sermons about humility. A rabbi in Chicago quoted Clara when urging his congregation to remember the difference between confidence and conceit. A pastor in Georgia challenged his congregation. What do we expect from our leaders? Power or principle? Media outlets began to revisit old interviews, speeches, and policies, reevaluating them through the lens of Clara's comment. Had the country grown too tolerant of ego and power? Was charisma being mistaken for competence? One editorial in The Atlantic suggested that Clara's quiet interruption marked the moral turning point of the decade. Clara herself remained mostly silent. She refused offers for book deals, declined appearances on national television, and turned down an invitation to attend a political gala in New York. "I'm not a symbol," she said plainly to a local journalist. "I'm a woman who was tired of being polite." Her restraint only deepened public fascination. Local leaders, however, took notice. A city councilwoman in Michigan quoted Clara during a heated budget debate. "Let's not be selfish," she said. "Let's think about who this money is supposed to serve." A school principal in Arizona started a weekly reflection session called Clara's Minute, where students could speak up about anything, no grades, no judgment. Meanwhile, online forums exploded with personal testimonies from individuals reassessing their own role in the democratic process. One user wrote, "For years I felt powerless. Then I watched Clara stand up with nothing but her words. It made me believe I could do the same." Another added, "It wasn't about Trump. It was about truth. Her kind of truth.